All right. Welcome back to the Bachelor Life Coach podcast. I'm your host, Lynn Grogan. And today we're talking about season 24, episode 10 of The Bachelor, which is coincidentally episode 10 of this podcast. And today I have with me, I'm so excited for this. I have Carrie Marshall with
So
me.
fun. Hi,
Tell the
Lynn.
people about yourself, Carrie.
Hi, all the people. I'm so excited to be here today. My name's Carrie Marshall, and I'm a certified life coach through the Life Coach School. And I get the opportunity to coach all the dudes. So my niche is I coach men, mostly business professionals and CEOs who have amazing success at work, but they might struggle a little bit in their personal lives. And that's why they come and find me.
Yes. And you've also coached me before, and I have like a girl crush on you, which now you know about because I'm telling you live on this
Yes. Oh, I
podcast.
love it. I love it so much. Yeah. And I also get to contract for the Life Coach School. So I get to like coach amazing people like you. And coaching is just really my jam. I just love it so much.
And you're so
And
good at it.
well, thanks so much. You know, it's really fun to be able to just coach. And The Bachelor, let me tell you, I'm just pretty sure that they need to hire a life coach.
Like one of us, like yesterday.
Exactly. Like yesterday, like 3 seasons ago, it just needs to happen.
I know. Well, we're like the enemy. I feel like life coaches would be the enemy of this show. But
Totally. The producers would not like us at all. They
no,
would be like, listen, you're doing the exact opposite of what we do.
exactly. And did you see though the announcement this week that the next bachelorette is 38 years old?
I did.
Yeah.
And that they're going to have kind of the older contestants, which I think is going to be really interesting to kind of get that different vibe in there. And 38 years old, I think that she's ready to go. You know, she's actually on the hunt looking for somebody for life. So that'll be fun.
For life. I know. It's like, it's funny because I feel like they're going to call her like geriatric, like when we go to like the OB and they're just like, oh, you're at the geriatric age. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, what?
What is happening?
I know what is happening. So I'm like, I'm her age. So I'm excited because I'm like, oh, this is going to be more interesting. I'm just like, I don't know. This whole season's been super fun to do the podcast, but like, I'm excited to explore the brains of slightly more mature brains.
Yeah, and it's really fun that it is that 38-year-old because I think when I was thinking back on my bachelor journey, I was like, oh, I started watching it when I was this age. So 38, I'm like, oh, you're going to get all of us that maybe have like fallen off a little bit of watching The Bachelor. Going to totally be back in it. Like, yes, 38, let's do this.
Wait, tell me about your bachelor journey. How long have you been watching?
So I started watching the very first season, of course, and watched like religiously for 5, 6 seasons. And then as I got older and I got married and started having kids, I was like, yeah, you know, just a little bit too much drama for this mama. So I stopped watching and then kind of picked it up the last season. So
Amazing. Wait, was I the bad influence that got you back into The Bachelor?
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
This is my goal in life. At some point where it's going to be infiltrated all across every life coach everywhere.
It's going to be so
Why not?
good.
Oh my gosh. So let's talk about this show. We're going to do a recap.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, we had the women tell all, but it wasn't just that. They started out with the rose ceremony in Australia. Peter's down to 3 ladies. So we had Hannah Ann, Madison, Victoria F, and Peter lets Victoria F go. She
Not
leaves.
surprising.
Not at all surprising.
He kind of got what he wanted out of that one. That's how I kind of saw it, right?
She was fantasy suite material, but maybe not wife material for him.
She totally was. Absolutely. Absolutely. So he was like, thank you. Next.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and you don't get a rose. And so then, you know, we transition back into the studio where they have the women tell all, where you know, they go through some of the key highlights. Like, I think the whole purpose of this is just for them to like recap the season so we remember what happens through the bickering of ladies. And so they talk about like Alea and her fakeness. They talk about Champagne Gate. They talk about McKenna. They bring Tammy on to like bicker about everything. Nothing gets resolved. It's basically this cacophony of noise with nobody running the show for a good 5 minutes.
No, that's the crazy thing. Yeah, no one runs the show. It's just like, here you go, ladies, have at it.
I think a little bit it's like the producers going, oh, you want to know what it's like to be us? Here you go. And so we get a sample and we're like,
here's
no,
the
thank
women
you.
tell all.
Yeah. And then we have hot seats with Kelsey and Victoria F. We see Peter and Chris go and party crash some Bachelor Nation parties, which they're
Which, can I
thrilled.
tell you, just from my perspective, I actually love Bachelor Nation
Yeah.
because as I was watching it over again and seeing them crash these parties, I had this really like thing of the example of this looks a lot like a Super Bowl party.
Right?
And so it's like as I coach men and we talk so much about sports, as they went into Bachelor Nation, I was like, look, this is like every Monday night for most men. We
I
dress up
know.
with our favorite sports jerseys. We're doing all of the things. We get all of our friends together and then we talk about the game. And I was like, look, we're just, as Bachelor Nation, we're just getting together talking about the game.
I know. This is such an upgrade for me. So, like back in high school, I had dude friends and they always wanted to watch WWF on Mondays.
Yes.
So, I don't know if humans know about this. I'm like, I used to watch so much wrestling. Like The Rock was big at the time. So, it was quite
Yes.
good. But this is an upgrade for me for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just Monday night, whatever game it is, whether it's football or Bachelor, it doesn't matter. It's all
Doesn't
just
matter.
getting together with our friends, having something to talk about.
I know. And I've never been to like a bachelor party, like one of these like show parties. So
Stop it right
I
now.
know, but I travel full time. It's just like kind of hard. I would have to do like what Peter and Chris were doing, which is just basically find randos and crash them. So maybe that's my next like Craigslist find. I'll just find like
For
bachelor.
sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Or Eventbrite. We're going to find an Eventbrite for you that's like Bachelor Party.
Yes. So if you're listening to this, please, I am like headed towards Reno. It's all good.
Please find Lynn.
Please find me. Um, and then we wrap up on like this kind of sobering note where Rachel Lindsay comes on and reads some of the hate mail that she and others have gotten, which I thought was actually an interesting move for the franchise because, there was all this backstory with Victoria F and how she had participated in White Lives Matter
Mhm.
campaign. And so I thought this was an interesting way to address it without even talking about Victoria F, but just being like, hey, here's the other side of it. Here's what it is. Just bringing awareness to everyone of what's happening.
Mhm.
I thought it was a cool move on their part. What did you think?
I did too. I think that that's the part that so many of us don't see is like what happens after so many of these women go home. We all see like their amazing Instagram posts and everything like that, but there's always this other side of it, which is when you expose yourself, the exposure doesn't come just for the good of like whatever it's going to mean for your life. There's also all of these other aspects that come into it. So I thought it was a really great move on the franchise's part.
Yeah, yeah. I had no idea. Like I assumed that they were getting like some trolls along the way, but I mean, how can we know unless we were in their shoes? So, yeah, I thought that was a really interesting move. And you're totally right. Like we have no idea what happens after it, but people have lots of opinions, including this show, like including this podcast opinions.
Absolutely.
Totally. So,
Absolutely.
well, on that note, shall we coach Carrie?
Let's do it.
Let's coachable moments. All right. So, okay, so we're going to start back at that rose ceremony where Peter gives Victoria F the axe and he keeps Madison. And so I thought this was like so interesting for Peter because um, he usually just goes for the girls that have given him validation along the way who have said either that
Hmm.
they're in love with him or they really want to be with him. But obviously, we see some reluctance and hesitation on Madison's part. But Peter's still
Hmm.
like so into her that he keeps her. And you had like an interesting note when we were kind of collaborating on this. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have the nickname for Peter this whole season that's called Peoplepleasing Peter. He is so desperate for other people's validation, and that's what he's really seeking. He even says it is what I want is validation. And so he goes around, and it's interesting to kind of see the different sides of Peter. And I'm always looking like, who is he people pleasing today or for this scene? He says things and then I'm like, oh, it must be people pleasing for the producers. He really wants to make sure that he's doing the right thing for them. And then he talks to Chris and it's like really people pleasing for Chris of, am I doing the right thing, Chris? I don't know. What do you think? And then when he's with the women, it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really interesting with his relationship with Madison that he's being vulnerable there. He's asking her during that of like, are you sure, when he gives her the rose and she says yeah. He's like, are you sure? He's so unsure himself about Madison because there's not the people pleasing with her. He's not getting the validation that he has with the other women.
Yeah. So why do you think he did this? Right? Because he could have gone with Victoria F, who was all in at that point. She finally decided she was all in. But Madison, I mean, she walked away. They didn't have their fantasy suite moment. Like, what do you think changed for him that he was able to kind of
I think
make
that
that
there's
move?
something, yeah, I think there's something with that relationship there. I think that his thoughts with Madison, as much as he has or she hasn't given him that validation that the other women have, I think that there's something about the relationship itself that feels different for him. That
Mm,
he is willing to go out on a limb for her, where the other women, it's kind of like almost the same type of thing. They give them the validation, he knows that they love him, he knows that he's kind of their number one, where with her I think he's always kind of like there's something different here and he's still trying to figure it out.
yeah. Yeah. And like giving it a chance to figure it out. And I mean, for her too, she obviously didn't walk away and stay away. She came back.
Mhm.
Um, and so I do think like you touching on that like moment of vulnerability, I think that is important here because this is the thing that Peter's been afraid of this whole time of being exposed to picking someone who may not pick him back, which is very much
Exactly.
Madison right now.
Right, exactly. So that's where I saw that vulnerability come in. It is the time that he's so unsure. His hands are shaking as he has the rose and he's saying Madison's name. And I thought that was so fascinating. He's that vulnerable that he was willing to say that, and he didn't know if it was a yes or no. I think every other time he's known that it's going to be a yes.
Yeah, he hasn't. Yeah, totally. Like, there's never been a hesitation. It's all like, oh, you're going to accept this rose. Like, he didn't even need to say it with most other people, but he needed to say it with her. Um, Yeah, I thought it was like I thought that was a really interesting moment for him. And for both of their relationships. It's like, okay, where is this gonna go for them? Like that's why I'm so curious for next week because they keep telling us over and over again, we don't know what to expect. And I have a feeling it has something to do with Madison. But
Mhm.
is this something that you see in your male clients? Like this people pleasing side? Because I often associate people pleasing with women. And so it's been so interesting to see it played out for men.
Yeah, absolutely. People pleasing definitely isn't something that is just for one like girls or women. It's not something that just women do. People pleasing is definitely something across the board. And we see it with men, it just comes in a different form. So people pleasing comes for in jobs. You see this a lot of like going after it, but they do it just a different way.
Mm,
And so being able to see like what way is Peter searching for validation, and what way do we search for validation? Through jobs. So you see this really often with men of searching for the validation, the people pleasing through their jobs and through recognition at their work.
mm. Do you think Peter thinks of being the bachelor as a job?
I think he does. I think he does. As you, like I said, as before, you can see that he does some people pleasing for both the producers and Chris. And so I actually do think that he sees it as a job.
Yeah. Yeah, because as you were saying that, I was just like, "Oh, right, he has this job, and they get paid for it. They get paid at least
Yeah.
100K.
Hmm.
So how could you not see it as somewhat as a job? Like I have to perform,
Hmm.
right? And then for all these women, it's like, okay, he's performing for them. Like I wonder how often he just kind of drops his guard. Like sometimes you see a little bit like bloopers where you're like, oh, that's what Peter's really like, but on screen, that
Exactly. And so
different.
that's why I think, yeah, that's why I think the performance thing comes in for the job is, you see some things and it's like, oh, he's trying really hard right now to do what he thinks the producers want instead of just being himself. Like you said, the bloopers, you kind of see that actual Peter come out. And so I do think that it's more of a performance, a job for him.
Well, and I think that like what makes it so challenging for a lot of people is there is a lot of reward involved in that type of people pleasing. Like you
Mhm.
probably would get the the word that came into my mind was upgrade, but promotion at work. You'd get the promotion at work. You would get, like probably more money, like more recognition, more this, more that. So it seems like on the one hand, you're going against maybe some of your wishes, but the people pleasing might also align with what you want to. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's how people pleasing is, right? Is we don't just people please for other people. We actually always get something back in return, whether it's validation, something monetary like money from a raise, something like that. So that's why people pleasing is something that we see so often in so many different people. It's because we actually get something in return. But the hard part about that is then we're not getting it from ourselves, right?
Mm.
Peter doesn't have self-confidence where he just knows that no matter what he does, he can have confidence in himself and like really have his own back.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, what could he even do at this point? Like, how could he help himself?
I think that it really does start with just knowing that there's nothing that you can do that's going to actually hurt who you are with your worth. I think it really does come down to knowing that your value and your worth is just something that's innate. And then the other thing with people pleasing is asking yourself the question of, if everything's an option for me, what do I decide to do? Not based on other people's opinions.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that's interesting too, because it's like they don't really have outside feedback at this point. They have producers,
Absolutely.
and so which are not their family, which are not their friends. So really it's just like, okay, if I don't want what the producers want, then they kind of do have to go back to what they want. And that might be one of the first times that they've ever considered that for themselves. So maybe that's what Peter's doing here, kind of just like, okay, I'm not trying to make good TV anymore. Now I'm trying to pick my wife.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
oh, Peter. Well, let's move on to number 2, which is the hot mess, which is this women tell all. Like, this is the part I don't like. It's just the noise of it. Like, they're all just screaming at
So
each
much
other.
noise. So much noise.
I think I'm always so surprised that they're still so mad at each other. Like, this is the part I don't get. Not all of the people, like Kelsey and Victoria F, seem to kind of be staying out of it.
Mhm.
But the rest of them very much seem alive in the drama in the
Mhm.
same way they were on the show. Like, I'm like, how are we still in the show, in quotes? Like, why does it matter at this point? They don't need to be friends with each other. Like, why do you think they're still so up in each other's business?
I think because they still get to be part of the story when they're up in each other's business. So, when they drop the drama and they drop, like you said, any of these experiences or things that they had in like problems with the other women, then it's like they move on from the experience. They move on into their own life. But when they stay with this conflict with each other, they continue to get to be, number one, part of the story. Number two, they get to have a villain, and then they get to be the victim.
Yeah, which I mean, almost all of them were just like vying for that victim role. Nobody wanted to be the villain.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And you see that a lot with victims. It's almost like they're willing to do so much to continue to hold on to being the victim.
Oh, so I would guess that most of these women would be doing this in their day-to-day lives as well. And they're probably getting a lot of
Absolutely.
validation for that back home. Just like, oh, I saw how they edited you. Like, that was not good. I can't believe she did that to you. Um,
Exactly. And the more validation, the more that they're like, oh, yeah, see, it really is something that happened to me, instead of taking ownership of it, of like, no, this is how I showed up. There's no victim, there's no villain. It's just an experience, but
yeah.
they still get to hold on to it and continue to play it over and over in their life, not only for this experience, but like you said, probably outside of it as well.
Yeah, totally. What did you just like think of this section of the show? Like when you're watching it as a viewer?
I like you said, it sounds like just a lot of noise to me. It reminds me of why I probably had a lot of guy friends in high school
And why
and in
you coach
college,
men?
like, and why I coach men. Absolutely. Because when I watch that, I'm just like, it's like watching like a circus for me. I'm like, what is happening? And like,
Yes.
sometimes I don't even get it, because that type of interactions with each other, I just never have really been part of. And so it fascinates me, but in the weirdest, like it's a car wreck type of a way
It's
almost.
such a car wreck. I know. And like, I also was quite interested that the drama has not evolved at all. It's still the same dramas on the show. I thought
Mhm.
for sure they'd be sending each other DMs and we'd like have like move forward in the drama story. But how is it that they're still in the same like pile of poo of the same drama that they have?
I think because they're still getting ammunition from it. It's still something that's like stoking the fire. Like they're still getting that validation, like you said. People are still interested in it. People are probably still talking to them about it. And so it's still something that is very relevant in their life, even though everybody else has moved on, even though they're actually living outside of The Bachelor, but they're still getting the validation from outside sources that it is something that's still relevant.
Yeah. And so like I thought like throughout that whole scene, they kept trying to draw in both Victoria F and Kelsey, and they weren't like really into it.
No,
Like, why do you
no.
think they stayed out, but the other women were like really into it?
Victoria F surprised me at the
Yeah.
Women Tell All. I was like, who is this person? She showed up so much more almost aware of
Mhm.
herself. And so I think that it was almost the self-awareness of like, you know what, I'm just not part of this. It's not part of, I think it was the just that belief in herself that maybe that she was past that.
Mm. Oh, like she is in a different part of the story. She's actually moved on where the other people have
Sh-
not.
it, exactly, exactly. She's like in the next chapter, she's like, yeah, that was for you guys, but I'm over here.
I also just wonder if she wants to be past this whole story of her life. I mean, she's probably had a really rough go of things after the show, just with like being accused of ripping apart marriages. I mean, the whole White Lives Matter thing, which I still don't fully understand what, I don't know. But she seems like she's probably just like, okay, let's put The Bachelor behind us, whereas everybody wants to still be a part of things. Kelsey seems like she's got her feet in both camps. Like maybe I want
Hmm.
to have trauma, but maybe I also want to be like poster child for emotions or something, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But but yeah, I just thought this whole section was interesting and you know, and I think if you ask all of them like, do you want to stay in this victim role? Like they would say no because they think that that would be the right thing to say or that they're not a victim at all. But I think secretly they like because of the story and wanting to be a part of like the whole scene that is Bachelor, they want to be remembered
Yeah, I
and you
think that
get to be
that's what it
remembered.
comes down to. Yeah, you get to be remembered. It's like you might say that of, would you want to move on? And they'd say yes, but then they're going to go and call their girlfriends and talk about it more. And when people talk about it, they're not going to move on from it. They're going to be like, get right back in it with them.
Yeah. I also wonder too, I was just thinking about this, is like if there is some motivation for them to be dramatic. Like if the producers are like, oh, well, we're still deciding on who's going to go to Bachelor in Paradise. So if you really
Well,
stand
and
out
when you,
today,
yeah, and when you see that of like what is in it for them, well, when you have the drama, you're actually the one that the camera is on the majority of the time.
yeah. Yeah. And then people get to form opinions of you, good or bad. It just makes, if they're like, I guess if they make for good TV on the Women Tell All, then they're more likely to have the rewards of Bachelor in Paradise. So that does
Exactly.
make sense to me. Um, well, let's move on. I do want to talk about the role of Chris Harrison throughout the whole season. Like on the podcast, we haven't really talked about him at all because he's kind
Hmm.
of like this bystander, but he does play an interesting role.
He plays a big role, and that's why he is stuck around for all of the Bachelor seasons because he does so well at his job.
Yeah.
And
What
his
is his
job,
job? Yeah.
I was going to say, I think his job is a couple of different things. Number one, he's really good at being the neutral space for everyone. So he has, and he does a really good job of not showing if he has favorites
Mm.
in the moment, but then he's also the confidant for the Bachelor himself. And so you see Chris really be there for Peter in so many different areas. And even when Peter and Chris were talking about Madison and what to do, Peter really opens up to Chris, and there's a trust there between the two of them.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like Chris is playing a coach. He's really good at holding space. He's really good at being neutral for a lot of different people. And so that's why I think Chris plays such an important role to everyone in The Bachelor.
Yeah. I think the whole idea of him not being on sides is key. Where, you know, you can go to him for anything and then it's kind of safe. He's kind of like the dad. He's a coach, but also kind of a dad role. Like, if you take a step back, he is sort of an interesting pick for a host of a show like this because it's like, okay, we have 20 somethings trying to date each other. And then here you have this like middle aged man in a suit who's kind of like a Southern gentleman, sort of. Um, like, how do we get to Chris Harrison in a show like this, but somehow it just works?
It just works. That's the thing with Chris Harrison is it just works for him. Um, I think, like you said, being the neutral space, I love actually watching him interact with all of the women
Mm.
because you can see that there's actually a relationship even between them, because how he treats each of them is so different when he's interacting with them. Some of them he gives a big hug to, some of them he gives this knowing look like they've already had a conversation about what's going on. So I really do think that Chris does not only a lot on screen, but off screen as well.
Yeah, like he's sort of like you trust him, whereas they might stop trusting their producers. Like he's somebody that doesn't seem like he has an agenda with them. That he is just there. I mean, his presence often reminds me of a very good waiter at your table, like a server coming over and just like knows exactly the right moment to show up and ask if you need anything, what else is going on. And then he just kind of floats away. Like you notice him. I mean, sometimes his presence does mean something to them, like if he shows up at weird
Mhm.
times, but mostly like he's a very steady Eddie. He shows up exactly when he's supposed to. He leaves when he's supposed to.
Yep.
And yeah.
He's very neutral, and just like during the women tell all, you just see him sitting there. Like
Mhm.
it's almost like he had a timer on or something. Like he just
Right?
sits and just listens. And I mean, very neutral for most of it. You can see a couple times where he like raises his eyebrows or whatever, but most of the time he just sits and he's just very there, like there, just holding space as the women do their thing and talk to each other.
Yeah, and he's really good at being not a big personality because they
Hmm.
need the bachelor or the bachelorette to be the big personality. So I've always thought that's interesting about him. Like, how do you find that balance? My audio is doing something weird. How do you find the balance between like being the face of the show, but also not being the face of the show? It's like so fascinating to me.
Absolutely fascinating. I think that he knows exactly why the show sells and why it's so important for so many people, and that he knows that that's not his job. I think it's almost like a pressure off of him to not have to be the thing that's in the middle of everything. But he knows that it doesn't really work without him. And
Mhm.
so I do think that he's figured out just that exact balance of it's not about me, but it absolutely works because of me.
Yeah. How do you think he isn't creepy? Like, because I've never found him to be creepy at all, but like a lot of people could be in that role and get kind of creepy.
Absolutely. I think it goes back to the neutral part of it.
Yeah,
Like if he were to be having opinions about all the women, that would be creepy.
it
If
would
he was
be.
like in right, if he was on screen saying things about different women, and it would just get creepy. So I think that being the neutral space is why he's so good at, just like you said, being kind of the waiter, the dad figure, all of that on the show.
Mm, so interesting. I feel like I'm going to start watching him more on upcoming seasons because I just am like, how does he do that? It's like, it seems so simple, like anybody could step in and do it, but really, no, you have to like kind of check your ego at the door for that type of role.
It's like watching a really good coach. I mean, you and I have both been in spaces with really phenomenal coaches. That's how I thought I see Chris. I'm like, wow, like how is he doing it? What are his techniques? How does he, work with so many different people, different personalities? It's just the same of watching a really good, phenomenal coach.
Yeah.
You watch them and it's like, wow, how are they doing this? How do they hold space like this? How are they staying so neutral? It's just one of those things I think that comes with both experience and then a little bit of expertise as well.
Yeah, he makes it look easy. I mean, I think especially, well, we can move on to like coachable moment number 4, which is like we have all these hot seats
Hmm.
where, they bring up Peter and Kelsey and Victoria F. And I just thought was so interesting, and we've touched on this a little bit, is that like who are these people? Like they seem so different than they were on the show. They seem calmer. They've watched the show back, and like I was particularly like surprised by Kelsey, like how she was able to
Hmm.
laugh at herself and all the things that happened. I was just like, wait a minute. Like she was so unable to do that on the show, and now she was like, well, of course, like this is hilarious. Um like that was wild to me that they were just all so self-aware. Did you
So
catch that?
crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, it was like you said, it was like night and day of like, are these the same people? And I think that a lot of that comes from getting back into your own environment. I think that when you're in The Bachelor or something like that, where you're around all the producers and the other contestants and all of it, it is like so intense. And you kind of almost, it's like switching reality, right? It's like you're almost in a virtual reality of The Bachelor because everything is so intense. And so I think removing the contestants from, and watching it over again, watching it with the family, other people's opinions that you trust, I think that almost helps with the self-awareness of like, oh yeah, that was just that one moment, that one experience, but this is maybe who I really am or how I'm processing it a little different. I can see that that was maybe even not me,
Mm,
and maybe this is who I really am. But yeah, completely different. Victoria F. and Kelsey, especially.
totally. I mean, I didn't if I think what was interesting about that part is it wasn't just like, "Oh, well, they were playing such a role on the show and now they're their true selves." It really was, like, eye-opening to me to see how humans can act so differently when they're in high-pressured situations, getting very little sleep, in an environment that's just so wildly different than their everyday, and how they show up, because it's like, I think we all have that at some point in our lives, like, the shit just hits
Absolutely.
the fan, and then how do you react? And then when you do get a moment to breathe and look back at it, you're like, who was that person? And for a lot of people, that can like invoke a lot of shame for them, or, they want to hide that part of their lives or avoid it completely thinking about it. But for these three, it's completely unavoidable. Like they had
Mhm.
to watch it. They had to watch the show back. I mean, they could have chosen not to, but it would have been kind of hard not to see what they were like. Um, and so for all of them, they could have dropped into this deep shame, and I didn't get that impression at all from any of them.
No, I really got kind of almost like an ownership of it. Like when Victoria F was talking, she was just very much like self-aware about like, oh, I can see that if I would have accepted Peter's love, this would have gone differently.
Yeah.
She just was very much taking ownership of how she showed up, like you said, with no shame, but just kind of like, yeah, I could see what happened there, and I wish I would have done it differently.
Yeah, it was almost like a gift to her, because I'm sure
Mhm.
she does this in every single relationship she's ever been in, but nobody's like, "Hey, I filmed you for the last 6 weeks. Do you wanna see how you show up in relationships?" Um, and so she could have totally shut down and not seen that, but obviously she was open to seeing it at least a little bit, and it seemed like it was kinda helpful for her a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, but then we also get, like, this interesting interaction with Kelsey, and you picked up on this, and I've been thinking
Yeah.
this the whole season too about her and emotions. So
Yeah, like I just thought it was so crazy that they were like, okay, we're going to have this moment with Kelsey, and we're going to celebrate that now she is the poster child of emotional adulthood, or, taking her emotions and feeling them. And I was like, what is happening here? Because there's a difference between what we know as coaches is reacting to emotion versus processing emotion. And what I see Kelsey do so often is reactive emotions, right?
Yeah.
Everything is big, everything is hard, everything is so drawn out. But is that really emotional adulthood? I don't think so.
No, I never got the impression there of like, "Oh, that's how you do it. Cool. That's a good example. I would totally show my clients that." Like, no, never. Because it was just, yeah, it was a lot of reaction. And so I think it's easy to like misidentify tears as being like a processing of emotion, which always, it can be, totally it can be, but for her, it was, like, coming from that kind of extreme reaction without actually processing anything, just kind of like a lashing out, like a
Hmm.
outburst of sorts, um, which is, like, maybe for her a step in the right direction, but there's still more to go, and almost by
Hmm.
awarding this, it's like saying, "Okay, you're good."
You're all good. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and the one thing that Ashley did say during that segment that I really did appreciate was she said, there is no place in this world for emotional shaming.
Mm,
And that I 100% agree
yeah.
with. I do think that that is something, especially with my male clients, that I see so often of not being allowed to experience and process all emotion. And so we really do in our society have emotions that are seen as bad or good for different individuals to have. And I don't think that I 100% agree. Emotional shaming, there is no place in it, in where we're going. And so to really work on that, I think is important, but to do it in the right way. And like I said, not seeing that Kelsey is maybe the poster child for this emotional uprising or whatever you want to call it that we want to have, but to really see that there is a way of accepting our emotions and that it's great for all of us to be able to do that. That's how we really, as a society, start to work on our emotional intelligence, is allowing other people to have the process and process emotions how they need to.
Mm. Well, and I think if anything, though, it did start the conversation. like she showing emotions and having people like have so many strong reactions to her did start the conversation. And what does it mean to have an emotion? What does it mean to process the emotion? What are the different ways? Like there have been times, a few times throughout the season where they're like, well, I journal and I do this and I do
Mhm.
that. And so it suggests that there's lots of different ways you can do it. And there totally are. Um, but like getting to that emotional adulthood state of mind, and being able to process in that way is it goes a little bit beyond what we're seeing Kelsey do.
Absolutely. But like you said, a great way of actually opening up the conversation.
Yeah, totally. Which I think brings us like kind of right into number 5, which is this really interesting, powerful moment that we had kind of already talked about with Rachel Lindsay at the end, who, Rachel Lindsay, previous Bachelorette, um, she comes on to read some comments that have been shared on social media, which I think they call hate mail on the show, like
Mhm.
hate comments. And and so we see most of the people that they like close-ups on in tears. I was in tears at that moment. I just thought it was like pretty uh uh, raw for
That's
TV. Like we usually don't see
eye-opening.
that
Yeah.
eye-opening. Yeah, totally
Yeah.
eye-opening.
Yeah.
um I guess my biggest question for you is how you coach people on this, because you know we hear about this and we're like, oh my gosh, this is so terrible, you're being totally in victim mode. But it doesn't help somebody empower themselves. And so,
Exactly.
like, how
And
do you
that's
coach on
really
this?
what it is. Well, the first thing is that we know that people are allowed to do whatever they want to. They can say and do whatever they want to. And so that's sometimes where I like to start with my clients is other people are allowed to show up how they want to. But it really is deciding for ourselves what we want to make those words mean. They really are, if we're going to say neutral, people's words are neutral. And what we really want to do though is decide, what do I want to think and feel about this? Because like you and I were just saying with when they were reading the comments, I really honestly didn't want to see some of those comments as neutral. As they were
Same,
reading them, I
same.
was like, you know what? This is an opportunity for me to really check in with myself. And I was like, yeah, I wouldn't be okay with that.
No.
And that's the opportunity I think that we give our clients when things like this happen, is we give them the opportunity to choose, and that it doesn't have to always be one way. They
Mm,
don't always have to see something like that and do the action that they think, right? They don't have to react a certain way. They really do get to decide. And I think that that's where the power lies, is deciding for yourself what you want to do when that happens.
mm. Yeah, because I think that's where people get really confused or upset, like in coaching. It's just like, well, wait, why do you want me to see this as neutral? Does that mean I just like just let anything bad happen to me? And like it starts like that.
Exactly.
And I totally hear where they're coming from, right?
Mhm.
But I think that's where we get to the point where you just say, okay, like we can see these words as neutral, but you can also decide that you don't want them in your life. And that's where you can set up a boundary. Like, if you do this, I'm going to do that. And you had a nice note here that just said, boundaries. Like they actually talked about boundaries here with
Yeah, yeah,
their
the women started to say right then, like they talked about, yes, we're getting these. And one of the women said, I've just set up for my filter that if there's any of these type of words, it filters them out. So that was her setting a boundary with her social media. She just decided to set the filter up that if these certain words are in my DMs, they will not even make it into my DM. They'll just be completely filtered out. That's a boundary. She's taking care of herself. She's not telling other people that they can't DM her or email her, but what she's doing is protecting herself. So she's saying, I'm going to go ahead and take care of myself here, which is how a boundary works.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't have to come from this place of drama. It doesn't have to be in reaction to. It can just be like, hey, you know what? I would prefer that somebody not tell me to kill myself every day. So I'm going to set up a filter for that. It's the same way
Absolutely.
that, like Gmail has given us the option to report spam, right?
Hmm.
Like, I don't want to see this. I have a tool here. Like, I don't have to respond to this DM saying, no, you're a terrible person for saying this. I don't have to get into like a defensive mode with them. But yeah, I can just go ahead and say, like, I prefer not to. Um, and so I thought it was awesome that they showed it on here. And they sort of, I guess, had a tool for people to help, but it's like almost like, okay, now we see this, but what are we gonna, how can we take care of ourselves through this? And so I guess that's what our conversation here
Mhm.
today is like, okay, what is next? What can you do? Which is like really work to see the words as neutral and then decide what you want to think and feel about it.
Right. And I think that it really does come back to like deciding that your power is your own. I think that that's the thing is when these type of things happen, it feels so powerless. I mean, I've had a lot of clients say that of I just feel so powerless. What can I do? And I'm like,
Mm,
that's where we really want to decide and remind ourselves that we do have options available. We have options of how we want to think and feel about this, and it doesn't always have to be one certain way.
totally. Yeah, I think like I used to work in software before I was a coach, and there was a lot of like women in software and how like it was basically victim culture. They're like, okay, all these things are happening to us by these white guys in hoodies. And it was pretty rare to have somebody come forward and be like, no, no, here are some tools to help empower yourself. Like you don't have to wait for somebody else's permission to like step into your power and figure out how you want to like show up in these
Mhm.
moments. And so that's what I think is like, wow, I wish like I would have had coaching at that time because it would have given me all these tools to help in that way. Um,
Mhm.
but I mean, I do think this is an interesting first step, just making people aware, because that's the first step in anything. It's just like, okay, we're aware that this is going on, and now we can see it. We can see it more often. And I think have a lot more compassion for these contestants, like what they're going through. And they probably didn't know what they were signing up for necessarily.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think even just how you and I talked about how we were shocked that this was what was happening, I think that it really does start the conversation of like, oh, wow, these are real people that are getting these terrible emails and DMs and things just for being on a show, and that's it. That's all that
Yeah.
that happened. And so I do think that it is kind of a little bit more awareness as kind of like Bachelor Nation of like, oh yeah, kind and compassionate, like these are real people who are just going back to their normal lives and having that awareness that these type of things are happening to them, so can we show a little bit more compassion?
No, totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm wondering, I'm guessing like after that they did get a lot more love, like a lot more people sending them messages of love, just like not even realizing. Cause it's like, how often do we go out of our ways to thank people, show gratitude for people? We don't necessarily like, sometimes it's not top of mind unless we have an actual practice of expressing gratitude or thanks or appreciation for other people. And so it just kind of reminds us in the moment. So like that matters too.
Hmm.
That matters as well.
Well, and I think that it matters so much that, like you said, Lynn, when we have that appreciation, I think so often we have the appreciation, but then we don't like take the next step of letting people know. Like even the fact that Bachelor exists and that we get to have a podcast episode about that. I mean, how
Right?
amazing is that? Like you and I get to talk about it, but then what are we willing to do? Like what would you want to do for the next step? And that's even with our personal lives. I coach so many men about their marriages and they talk about how amazing their wives are. But when I ask them when was the last time that they let their wife know, they can't remember.
Mm,
And so it's like
yeah.
not just having the gratitude, but maybe like what can you do about the gratitude? What would the action line be if you're feeling gratitude?
Yeah, yeah, and being able to express that and just being like, okay, so instead of being angry that these things happen in the world and adding more anger to the mix, like, okay, how can we actually add love and gratitude to the mix, which just feels better all around? Because you're the one that feels that. Like the person
Absolutely.
receiving it, hopefully they do too from how they think about it, but we don't know. We have no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, it really does come back to like I just get to be in that space of more gratitude and more love because I'm the one that I'm creating my own feelings.
Yeah.
So that's what it really comes back to.
Yeah. Well, that's our 5 moments today, Carrie. Did we miss
So
anything?
fun. Oh, I think that we just need to do it again and again
I know,
because
right? We'll get you
so
on for one of
many
these
things.
drama seasons. Well, next season we're gonna have all these men that'll need coaching. So
Next
obviously you should come back
season,
for that.
yes, we're definitely hitting it hard next season because, like we said, we've got the older people, we got all the men coming on. It's going to be a whole lot of fun.
Total fun. So if somebody wanted to find you on the internet, where would they go?
So they're just going to go right over to Instagram. I'm a simple
Yes.
gal. So I'm at Drive Your Thoughts Coaching, and you can just find me over there. Just drop in some love and some coaching a little bit, and come on over and see me. I'd love to have you guys.
Yes. I will have a link to your Instagram account on the show notes, which will be lynngrogan.com /episode 10. Are we on episode 10?
We're
Yes,
on
episode
episode
10.
10.
Woo! All right. Well, thanks, Carrie.
Thanks so much, Lynn.
Okay. Bye.